In this lesson, we are going to talk about writing the equation of the line given 2 points, or given a chart of points. And so the big thing here, this is going to be just like the previous lesson that we did, where you're writing the equation of the line given a slope and a point. We're still going to be using that point-slope formula. The difference is this time we're not given the slope. This time we are going to have to find the slope, and that's where you can use the slope formula, or what I like to use is just finding the change in y over the change in x. That little triangle symbol is delta, which means change. So your process is to first find that slope between those 2 points, and then you can use your point slope form and then solve for y. So let's jump right in. Here's our first 2 points. Again, we're writing the equation, which means our answer needs to be in that slope-intercept form when we're finished, right? So the first thing we've got to do is find the slope between these 2 points. So I like to make my little table with my x's and my y's, and I put in my points 1, 5, and 3, 9. And then I'm going to subtract down, putting my y's over my x's. So I'm going to say 5 minus 9 over 1 minus 3. This gives me a negative 4 over a negative 2, which is positive 2. Now remember, all of this was to find what? The slope, which is our letter m. So now I can take that formula y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, and I can start plugging stuff in. And here's where it doesn't matter if you use this point or if you use this point, as long as you know that one of those is x1 and one of them is y1. And as long as both of those come from the same point. So I'm going to use this first point here, and I'm going to call this my x1, and the 5 is going to be my y1. So we're plugging in for y1, for m, and for x1. So I'm going to say y minus, and I'm still going to have my x minus over here. And I'm going to plug in my y1, which was 5, the m that I found, which was 2, and then my x1, which is 1, and then I simplified just like we did before. So from here, I would just distribute the 2. So I now have 2x minus 2. I'm going to bring down my y minus 5 on this side. And then my last step is to add the 5 over. So I get y equals 2x plus 3. Does that say y equals mx plus b? Yeah. So that's our answer. So let's try it again. So again, equation of the line means that our answer is going to say y equals mx plus b. But the first thing we got to do, because we're not given the slope this time, the first thing we have to do is find the slope. So I'm going to put those points into a little table here. So I have 2 and negative 4. Oops, that's a 4. Sorry about that. And then I have a negative 4 and 5. And then I'm just going to subtract going down. So I have here negative 4 minus 5. Remember, we put our y's on top. It's rise over run. And then I have 2 minus negative 4. So I get a negative 9 over, change, we get a 6. So we want to reduce this, so it becomes a negative 3 over 2. And remember, that is our m value. Okay? Then we're going to use our point slope formula. And it doesn't matter which point you use, just pick one. So before I picked the first one, in this example, let's go ahead and pick the second one. And so that makes this my x1 and this my y1. Again, it doesn't matter. If you want to pick the first one and see if you get the same answer, go for it. So I'm going to start by plugging in my y1, m, and x1. So we still have the y minus. This time my y1 value is 5. We have the equals and the slope and then the x minus. The slope we found was negative 3 over 2. Remember that from over here? Then we have the x minus, and we're using the negative 4. So then we just start to simplify. So I'm going to multiply here. I do want to simplify. We have this negative negative inside, which is going to make these positive. So when I distribute, I get a negative 3 over 2x, but then this is a negative times a positive, which will make a negative. And I like to multiply. The negative 3 times 4 will be a negative 12, divided by the 2 will give me a negative 6. I can bring down the y minus 5, and then the last step I have is to add 5 to both sides. So I get y equals negative 3 over 2x minus 1. Does that say y equals mx plus b? It does, so that's our answer. Why don't you try this one? So again, we need to start by finding our slope. What do you find for the slope? We take the negative 3, 5, and the 6, 8. We're putting that in our table, and then I can subtract down. So this becomes 5 minus 8 over negative 3 minus 6. This is a negative 3 over negative 9, which reduces to a positive 1/3. That's my m. Great, so when you plug it in, what does it look like after you've substituted? So I'm going to keep my y minus and the equals and the x minus, and then we're going to plug everything in. And I'm going to use, it doesn't matter which point you use, I'm going to use this one. And the reason why is there's no negatives in it. Anytime you add a negative, you are just increasing your likelihood of making a mistake. So I like to pick the point that doesn't have any negatives, even if the numbers are bigger. I have a calculator, so I can use that calculator to help me. But sometimes people miss the negatives when they're multiplying and stuff, so I just don't want to deal with it if I don't have to, right? So this point is my x1 and my y1. And then of course we have our m. So I'm just going to plug in my y1 is 8, my m is 1/3, and my x1 is 6. So then I multiply. I get 1/3 x minus 2. I have y minus 8 equals, and then I'm going to add 8 and add 8. And so I get y equals 1/3 x plus 6. Awesome. So in examples 4 and 5, we have a table that we're using. And you're still going to use the same process. The difference is your points are already put in a table. Now, to write the equation, you need the slope and a point. So I only need one of those points for the equation. And then to find the slope, I need 2 points. So you have an additional point in here. All of these are coordinate points, right? Okay. So I just need to pick 2. And generally, I just pick the first 2. So we can go find our slope from this. So I'm going to take my y's and subtract down. So I'm taking 8 minus 2 over negative 2 minus 0. So when we simplify, 8 minus 2 is 6, and negative 2 minus 0 is a negative 2. When we simplify that, we get a negative 3. Remember that that's our slope, so that's m. Then we're going to do the exact same thing we did before. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. The difference now is you can choose from any of the 3 points. So again, I always like to pick the one that doesn't have a negative, which would be this one. Also, do you see anything special about that point? Do you see how x is 0? What is this point if x is 0? This point here is a y-intercept. Y-intercept is b. So you could just take your m and b and plug it in. Y equals negative 3x plus 2. But if you don't see that, that's okay. You can go plug it in just like before. So we would say y minus 2 equals negative 3 times x minus 0. So I'd get y minus 2 equals negative 3x plus 0. Add 2 to both sides, and it works out the exact same. Y equals a negative 3x plus 2. So look for little tricks like that sometimes. If you know that this is a y-intercept, then use it. Save yourself some time. Let's look at this one. First of all, just to show you, do any of our x values equal 0? Nope. So we're not given a y-intercept in this one. We have to go all the way through the steps. So why don't you start by finding the slope? I'm just going to choose the first 2 points, and we're going to subtract down. Remember, we put y over x. So -5 minus 1 and -4 minus 8. I get a -6 over -12, which reduces to a positive 1/2. Remember, that's our m value. Cool. Pick your point and find the equation of the line in slope-intercept form. Your answer should say y equals mx plus b. Remember that I like to pick the point that doesn't have any negatives, but you can choose any of them. In fact, just to show you, I'm going to pick the point that has both negatives this time. And you should get the exact same answer as if you picked the 8, 1 or the 2, -2. So when I plug this in, it's going to say y minus. My y1 is -5 equals my slope of 1/2 times x minus a -4. We need to simplify those minus and negatives by making them positive. And then I can distribute. So 1/2 x plus 2. We have the y plus 5 over here. And then I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides, and I get y equals 1/2 x minus 3. It would work out the exact same way if you use the 8 and the 1. The difference would just be here and here, and then you'd follow those same steps. So why don't you try one more for me? So somewhere on your paper, if you're using my handout, you should have an empty box. Why don't you go ahead and find the equation of the line for this table. So the first thing we have to do is find the slope. So I just used, the first 2 points here, and I found the slope. Remember, I subtract down. My y is on top, the x is on the bottom, and I got a slope of -2/3. Now, I did give you one where we have a 0 in here. What happens when your x value is 0? This is your y-intercept, right? So you could say that that's b, just plug it in and get y equals -2/3 x minus 4. That would be fine. Again, if you don't see that shortcut, you can just plug in those values. I happen to use the same point because it was a 0. That makes the fraction really easy to deal with. And then you just go through the work. I took care of the minus by making it a plus, and I distributed. The 2/3 times 0 is still just 0, and then we subtract the 4 on both sides, and we get that same answer of y equals -2/3 x minus 4. So this is all the same exact process as our previous lesson, but this time we have to find that slope before we can plug it all into the formula. So let's go ahead and try some of your practice problems.